building a business is very much like riding a bike uphill. And if you let go, if you stop pedaling, you start to fall down. And I know that because we've been there. Like we didn't pedal for a number of years because we couldn't get out of our own way. And it hurt our growth. We started to decline in MRR. We had to turn things around. So I don't think anyone's safe.
Hello and welcome to the Exponential Scale podcast. I'm your host, Ron Schmelzer. This is the show where we talk about how tiny teams with big ambitions are doing more with less, scaling smarter, not harder, and building big businesses with teams that can fit around a dinner table. On today's episode, we're talking with Kyle Racki, who is the co-founder and CEO of Proposify. Hi, Kyle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Ron, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and the cool thing about my guest, we've been chatting for a while and connecting to make this podcast episode happen. And what's interesting is that my guest today has spent years running a design agency before realizing that the biggest bottleneck wasn't the work, it was the proposals. Can't make sales without sending a proposal. Someone's got to read that proposal. Someone's got to first write that proposal. So he co-founded a software company to solve that problem. And today, Proposify is the proposal and contract platform of choice for agencies and service businesses, having raised a bit of money, but more importantly, having reached $9 million plus in ARR with a team of around 55 or so people. And so we're going to dig into how this former agency builder built a software company to serve that exact market and how raising money, even a little bit, to compete in a crowded category has shaped his approach. So for those of you that aren't aware, I really want Kyle here to help introduce himself and talk a little bit about the background and where Proposify came out of, the origin story.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks again for having me, Ron. So yeah, we're in year 12 now of running Proposify. So it's been a long time. It's been, I think at this point, like the majority of my adult life has been doing this thing. So it's interesting. It started, I was a designer out of college, worked in an agency, not terribly interesting other than back in the early 2000s, we were still using CD drives to store files. There was no cloud sharing, Dropbox or anything. So they would put me on proposals and I'd have to lay them out and make them look pretty because we were an agency. And that was sort of the aha moment of like, wow, I think Basecamp had just come out that year. And we were like, I just thought there should be a Basecamp for proposals was kind of the original genesis, and sat on that kind of idea in the back burner for a long time. But then, eventually went out on my own, freelance, hired a couple people, had a small design agency, and really wanted to break out of services and get into products. Really just wanted to start a SaaS, as many service business owners do. And so it was a journey for sure to get it off the ground and get people using it while trying to run the agency. But eventually we were able to raise a small amount of money, enough to, I think, afford our salaries for about 10 months or so while we were trying to find product market fit. And then around 2014, we started to really find that traction and start to scale.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's a fairly typical story for folks who've come out of some larger company or whatever organization they are and then realize there's a problem that they'd like to solve and they go ahead and solve it and build a company out of it. Many successful companies have actually started that way. So let me ask you a little bit about that, especially now that we're in this AI era and people feel like, one of the things about proposals, it's words, right? It goes on a page and someone's going to read them. And one of the things that a lot of AI systems are pretty good at now is generating words, understanding words. Whether or not those words make sense and whether or not they stick to reality is a whole other issue here. But, jumping ahead a little bit, because when you started Proposify, AI was not really anywhere really doing this sort of stuff. It was around for a while, but it wasn't nearly as widely used now. So what are you seeing in terms of the AI landscape? How is that impacting proposals on the generation side and on the client side as well? And where do you see things heading?
Well, I should start by saying like Proposify's value proposition was never about the words. That was never a thing that we even attempted to help people with. It was always kind of three things, right? Which was the visual presentation. My original thought was that it was only really design studios and marketing agencies that really cared about the visuals. But what we found is that some of the people who appreciate us the most are the ones who are like kind of more of like blue collar businesses, cleaning franchises, landscapers, really all accounting. Like you'd be surprised at how many different types of industries actually care about the visual presentation of their documents and know that it's not just sending out a contract. A proposal is really about educating people, buyers who may not be even in the room, and being able to create that sort of impressive professional presentation that influences whether or not somebody's going to move ahead and sign your proposal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thinking about it visually is probably great. When you mentioned sort of the architects and landscapers, I'm like, okay, that rang a bell here because words won't do any justice at all to understanding what actually people are trying to put together. So from your insights, let's sort of continue there. Like, how maybe AI is actually even on helping you, in as far as the tailoring, the presentation part, or maybe helping the client better understand the proposal as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as the businesses who started to buy us got a bit larger, and we still serve very small businesses, but we also serve a few large ones. For them, a lot of it is, I mean, they can use PowerPoint or any kind of a tool to make it look good. But the problem that they usually face is that as their sales team grows, proposals become very inconsistent. They become error prone. And if every rep is using a different tool, if some are using Word and PDF and slide decks and all the other kind of stuff, they just don't really have any visibility into what people are sending and making sure that it's on brand, it's tailored, it doesn't have errors, they're not over discounting. So a lot of it is the control for those larger businesses. And the other piece that I think all small and large businesses really care about is the analytics, like being able to know when your buyer opened the document, which section they're on, and being able to really tailor those follow-ups based on the data and not just kind of guessing. So like maybe you send a proposal to a buyer, they ghost you, but then a year later you find that they're looking at your document and okay, I should reach out because they're maybe interested now. So those are really kind of the problems that we solve. And I would say where AI fits into that is, yes, it's very good at generating text and even like layouts and images now. And I think there will always be room for, people who want to kind of do it themselves, use a chat GPT or a Claude to spit out a proposal and throw it in a doc and send it away. I mean, those people were probably never going to use a tool like a Proposify anyway. But I do think that like AI's helped with the speed and the automation piece. There's other room, I think, for companies like us to win and our competitors, I'm sure, which is, AI can act as a great review system. So instead of having to trigger a manual review to go out to a person to make sure that it checks all the boxes and it's compliant, like AI is pretty good at that if you train it. And also being able to ask it questions about your data. So if you've got, dozens of proposals going out every week across the sales team, being able to sort of see like who out of my top performers and my low performers, what's the difference? Which are the proposals we're winning versus losing, and being able to sort of identify trends in the data. I think there's a big opportunity for that with AI.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, stepping back a little bit to sort of the early days, the creation of all this, and one of the interesting things is your own personal transition. You went from billing your time to building a product, right? That generates recurring revenue. And for other founders who are listening, maybe what was the hardest mindset shift, in that transition? When did you, I guess, have to stop believing about, how the business works to make Proposify possible in order to really build something that had repeatable sales?
Well, like I said, I was always a big fan of 37 Signals and Basecamp and their approach. That was sort of my North Star, even as far as bootstrapping goes, even though in the end we did raise money. We were always a big fan of bootstrapping, and we were quite actually reluctant to raise money. So, I mean, I think for us, it was, service businesses are very tough to scale, and we weren't particularly good at them. I mean, I was quite young when I started it. So I was just learning the ropes, I think, anyway, as a business owner. But, I think people have been attracted to SaaS for a long time because of the repeatability, the scalability, the fact that your margins are high in terms of, cost is zero essentially to take on a new customer. You've got recurring revenue. You don't have to chase, one-time fees every month. So there's a lot to love about SaaS. Although it's interesting because now, in the age of AI, SaaS is not as durable a model as it was once considered.
Yeah, a lot is changing in the landscape, but it's interesting. We've had some great interviews here on the Exponential Scale podcast. Interviewed Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier, and Fabian Veidt, CEO of Make, and Emmanuel Strashnov, CEO of Bubble, and Gina Bianchini, CEO of Mighty Networks, and they're all definitely in the SaaS business.
Mhm.
And the thing is that there's obviously use cases for when customers want to buy something that they don't have to actually assemble themselves, which goes to what you were saying even about proposals, right? So the reason why people buy Proposify is because yes, they could probably pull that proposal together themselves and even use AI tools to do it. But a lot of them just want to go on with their business. They don't want to be in that business. And the same thing is applying to SaaS. It's like, yes, people can build their own SaaS tools from scratch, but a lot of them don't want to. They just want to run their business. And actually, this brings up an interesting point here that the market is somewhat crowded, but it always has been competitive. When you entered the market, there were existing CRM vendors and proposal vendors and marketing automation vendors, Salesforce, HubSpot, and a dozen other platforms that had features that may have overlapped with your capabilities. So when you were a new entrant, what strategy did you use to win in this crowded market when the big platforms may have a feature on their roadmap? And what does that even mean for you and the customers in terms of winning?
Well, I think being a designer, I always came at it from the perspective of the proposals have to look great. You have to have control over the layout. And I mean, that was a bet, right? That was not a sure strategy. That was definitely a hypothesis that needed the market to validate, because I had a lot of people saying to me, like, oh, it's not about the looks, it's about the workflows, it's about going enterprise or whatever it happens to be. But any tool, and there really wasn't a lot of proposal specific tools on the market, at least SMB ones. There might have been enterprise grade ones. But pretty much they all spat out a quote at the end of the day, or they spat out it was like a WYSIWYG editor where you type in a box and it just spits out the words that looks kind of like an email. So kind of going into it needs to be a visual editor that kind of resembles InDesign that lets you do like really advanced layout was definitely early on. We weren't sure that was going to work. And we had a lot of people telling us like, this is a waste of time. Nobody cares. So I think we were able to really anchor and position on that. Like if you want your proposals to look great, use us. But our customers still really value that as far as what keeps them with us is like they love the output of what we generate.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you grew your own company. So you started about a dozen years ago, you mentioned,
Yeah.
and it was just when you started, how many people were on the team, and at what point did you sort of grow the team? From our perspective at Exponential Scale, 55 people is actually pretty sizable. So at what point did you sort of turn the corner on team size growth, and would you do anything differently now in sort of the AI transformative era?
When we started, we were three of us. It was myself, a co-founder, and a developer that we hired who built the first version. And as we raised a very small amount of seed money at the beginning, so about 250,000, that was enough to help us a little bit, but it doesn't go that far. So we did hire another developer. Once we started to actually get traction and started to scale our revenue, that was when we essentially operated as a bootstrap company at that point. And so for a few years, like I think up to maybe 3 million in ARR, we we got profitable, and then we would reinvest that profit back into a hire. So that was essentially how we grew it, kind of starting with like a support person, a marketing person, and kind of organically going from there. But then at a certain point, we did raise kind of a Series A round of investment, which, long convoluted story, group of investors put money in, founders took some secondary. Then about a year later, we ended up buying them out with another investor. So we have our current investor is CBGF, Canadian Business Growth Fund. And at that point, around circa 2018, that was when we started to act like a scale up, right? And that was where I think I'm really glad to see bootstrapping has come back, especially in the last few years, because for people who don't remember, like 2015, I would say to early 2022, it was all about raising, and like your value as a founder and as a startup was completely based off how much you raised, not necessarily how much you earned or how much revenue you drove. And it was really tough to resist that. And I don't think we would have taken the money if we hadn't been able to take secondary. I think for us, that was the de-risk, was to be able to kind of have a mini acquisition personally to give us like the longevity to keep going with it. But knowing that like we're now entering a different game where it's not just our business anymore. We can't just do whatever we want. We've got to generate a return for our shareholders. And that's kind of operating at a whole different mentality. And we did hire a lot of people, probably too many people, which slowed us down and created a whole bunch of problems, cultural debt, technical debt, that I think we probably would have been better off as a business had we not taken it.
That's really interesting insight. We're going to get into that technical debt in a moment, because there was a turnaround and a rebuild that happened not too long ago, and I want to get into that story. But yeah, the raising the pressures of becoming a unicorn style startup. Definitely, you're right. That 2015 through 2021 period was like the hyper startup era. It was well after the movie, the Social Network, and of course HBO Silicon Valley, and like all this sort of stuff. That was just sort of like it seemed like the only way to build a tech startup company was to raise a ton of money and do all that. And you're right. The stories are changing in part because of the success. A lot of these hyper growth AI companies. I was just interviewing Ben Broca, who has this crazy company called Pulsia, and he's doing 6 million ARR in just like 3 months. And he's got over 6,000 companies on his platform, and his conversion rate's crazy. And, actually, it turns out he did raise a little bit of money, but like the ARR is like far outpacing that. Same thing with Gamma, the company that's doing the AI slides. They were doing $100 million in ARR before they even raised their round. So we're at this point now where I think the dynamics are changing. It's almost like, well, investors, you want to come along for the ride. You're not going to drive this train. So let's get into it a little bit here. Talk a little bit about that change. You overhired a little bit, perhaps, and maybe would have done things differently, but then there was a correction. Like there was a period where you had a little bit of a turnaround and a rebuild of the platform as a result of the technical debt. Tell me a little bit about that. How did you manage to migrate? You had a customer base at that point, and you had this big redo. So how did you migrate that without sort of breaking their existing workflows and the things that they were doing at the time?
Well, as for the last question, it hasn't happened yet. So it remains to be seen. But I mean, we had sort of rebuilt the product in the early days, like we had like our first version that we took to market, and then like pretty quickly realized it had to be reworked significantly. So I had a few battle scars from that experience already and learning like what not to do. So we did build it in a way this time where it was essentially like a separate thing that there's very little risk. People can kind of bounce between versions, and we still need to migrate them over to it, but it has to be very like self-serve and easy for them. So that story has yet to be told. I'll update you in a few months in terms of how we got there. But as far as like when we realized a change was needed, it was 2022, and that was, I think, when we started to really notice growth had slowed down significantly. And we had hired a lot the year prior to just try to like brute force grow. I think we were actually at 110 people at our largest. But
that's a big difference from now. Yeah.
Big difference from now. Yeah. We're half, we're a little less than half that. So actually, no, I think we're exactly half that. But what we had realized was that, it became a cash concern because our revenue was not outpacing the expenses. So we had overhired and it was not translating to growth. We would have been out of cash in 9 months had we not pulled the trigger. And that was also early 2022. So the market was still pretty hot. And it felt like we were pulling back at a weird time when everybody was still just like blazing ahead. And it wasn't until a little later in the year that, there was a lot of companies doing layoffs and it suddenly became this very normal thing. But I think what we had realized was that it wasn't just purely the headcount. It was also the culture needed to change significantly. I think a lot of startups went through this, especially in the days of kind of like free money. Was like the office felt like a party. It was all, and everything was about internal, right? It was like maybe this department versus that department, instead of being like, we're on a mission to like do this and we all need to operate as one. It became very kind of insular feeling, and people were mainly concerned about like internal politics and how much fun are we having versus like getting work done. And so that was one factor. I think values was another one. We had to reshape our values, relook at our values because they weren't serving us. So there's a lot that had to change, not just in terms of how many people, but in terms of how we operated, the kinds of behavior that we tolerated or encouraged, and so a lot had to change. But then on top of that, we really had to we had years of technical debt that was never really addressed, and our customers are still on this like legacy platform that's kind of like the original lamp stack monolith architecture. And I didn't really have a technical leader who just could help navigate us through that transition. So I was lucky enough to find somebody named Mark Lacombe. He's our CTO, who joined about 3 years ago. And he was sort of the first one to be able to help us turn around the engineering team and the way that we were building, because it wasn't like we had just been kind of grinding our wheels stuck in the mud for many years and just not making a lot of progress. So we're still not on the other side of that transition, but we came out with version 3, the new version of Proposify, in beta last May. Now we're working to fix it up, improve it, get sort of feature parity, and then migrate our customers over. But we're much further now than we were then.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a really interesting story. The growth, what it really means to have a company of that size. Not the great stories that people hear, but the stories of the internal battles. And I feel that LAMP comment.
Yeah.
Having built many a LAMP-based application, PHP is still good for many a thing, but there's other modern ways of building things now. So,
well, and if you're just starting out, then great. I mean, this sort of takes us back to the AI conversation, because everybody now thinks that they're a builder. Everybody feels like they're a developer, because even if they don't understand the code, they can just type a prompt and code spits out and it seems to work. So, I mean, I would caution those who don't have the technical knowledge or understanding, say like, AI is great for spitting out a prototype and an early proof of concept and getting validation with the market. But as even some of the big unicorns have learned, who've laid off developers and then had all of these issues and now are hiring them back, is like, even if a lot of the code is being written by AI, having somebody who actually understands the architecture and knows what good looks like and knows what to ask for is absolutely essential. Or these people will just end up in a situation where even if they have a lot of users, the platform starts breaking for them and there's no easy fix.
Yeah, that was a really interesting conversation we had. There's another small team called the Dato CMS, just 13 people out of Italy who have an interesting headless CMS system. So for our listeners, that's a system for building web content, distributing content. But this is headless, meaning that you just API your way into it programmatically, and it creates websites and things like that. And their customers are actually developers, which is interesting. So in their case, what they've done is they say, well, let us handle sort of this back end stuff. But if you want to vibe code the stuff around it. You build your own interface, build your own internal system. Actually solves a lot of our problems. We don't have to deal with integration. You build the integration, vibe code it yourself, and you manage it yourself a little bit, shift the responsibility somewhere else. Kind of wondering, I mean, I don't know if you've thought about sort of maybe that sort of balanced approach. Maybe you want to listen to that episode. It's a really, really good one too, with the Italians. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds almost like a done with you service versus a done for you. And I think that goes back to like, are people going to vibe code every solution themselves? Probably not. I think it's new now that people can essentially create software without knowing how to build software. They just know how to ask it. That's a new concept. But I mean, if you think about every other kind of business out there, professional services, accounting, cleaning, landscaping, all these businesses, technically anybody can do this stuff themselves. They don't have to hire a company. Do they want to do it themselves? Are they going to do it as well themselves? Probably not. And I think that's just how business works. Right? You don't go build a toothbrush because you need a toothbrush. It's easier to go buy one that's already built. And I think it's the same with software. I think like very simple niche tools that either don't exist or they're like dead simple, it probably makes sense to vibe code it. But I think when people start getting into the guts of software and realizing how even with a team of developers who have AI tools, building is not easy. Everybody says it is until, well, I don't see anybody out there on LinkedIn who says like product is easy and every product can be easily copied. They're typically never the ones who have actually done it. They're the ones who just read the posts and say, oh yeah, products easy because you can vibe code.
Yeah. One of the things that people have definitely been talking about is that creation of all types now is much easier, whether you're creating social media posts or videos or images or software. But that's actually shifted the problem elsewhere. It's part of what you've talked about, which is the issue of maintenance and management and building up debt. But the other one is actually around attention. It's easy than ever to build something, but it's harder than ever now to get attention for it, in part because there's so many people building stuff and throwing it out there. You have to crack through not only the noise of the incumbents that are in the space, but just all the random stuff that someone's like, hey, I just built this in a weekend. I'm going to post it on LinkedIn or X or whatever and share it with everybody. And now you have to crack through that noise. So what have you seen in terms of marketing and awareness building and attention in your market or just in general that is sort of changing in this era? Also, it's getting harder to even use the platforms. SEO isn't working as well as it used to. A lot of the social media platforms, their algorithms are changing and breaking in not such great ways. So even using the prior approaches is starting to fail in many ways.
Yeah, I think it's a blessing and curse that creation has gotten easier. Just as an example, like before this podcast, I was looking at our Meta campaigns. I was essentially looking to relaunch Meta because we turned those off for months and months. And AI and Meta has tools now that like AI tools that can help generate and enhance some of the content that you upload. It's good sometimes, and it's absolutely abysmal at other times when you see what it's generated. I mean, it literally changed words on images to gobbledygook, and like read a headline and completely misunderstood that it was a testimonial and started acting like it was a cleaning company. And you think of the billions that Meta is putting into its AI, and it's still just stupid. Like humans need to oversee this stuff and make sure that what's going out the door isn't, because it will be, but people are running so fast now, they're not even stopping to like look at what the AI is spitting out to make sure that it's not garbage. And I read or heard yesterday about this concept of comprehension debt. So it's like with development, it was always technical debt, but now it's the fact of if the AI is doing all the writing and developers aren't even reviewing it, because who has time to review all of the code that AI is writing? Now all of a sudden you don't know how all the parts fit together, and you could never really debug it if you had to, because at a certain point AI can no longer see the big picture. And so I think that is becoming a bigger problem. The fact that we're moving so fast is creating new problems for us where we're not slowing down and we're not actually making sure that what's going out is quality. But as far as like how to stand out now, I don't know. It's never been harder, even though a lot of the tools have made it easier. I think like it's difficult for me to have perspective because we've been in business so long that we get a fair amount of we get so much inbound from just people directly searching us or finding us in Google that it's really nice to have that. And that's part of just being in business for a number of years. People eventually know your name and associate with you with a category. Starting out from scratch, I think it's way harder than it was 10 years ago to get attention, because we were able to, write some content, do some guest posts. Digital marketing was a lot more straightforward then. And so, yeah, it's harder now.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, even the SEO stuff is starting to sort of get challenged as people start using the AI responses from the search engines or asking the LLMs directly and bypassing search altogether. Now there's this whole area of AI engine optimization, the AEO and all this other stuff. So it definitely keeps changing. So let's bring it back to your organization a little bit. So as you're managing your company, now you can take advantage yourself of AI and automation tools for the things that you're doing. So I'm kind of curious, how has that changed the way that you're managing the teams? How has that changed the way that you look at augmenting the team? How does that change the management structure, reporting? I'm just sort of curious how in the AI enabled age, how it's impacted your operations.
Yeah. Well, if people haven't been able to tell by now, I'm heavily skeptical of a lot of AI. I use it. I'm bullish in one respect, but I also kind of see like the opposite side, and I haven't resolved them even with myself. So I'm highly concerned that we're becoming too dependent on this. And I think that a bubble popping is inevitable economically, which is going to drive the costs up. And we've become so dependent. Like I had Claude fail today. And I went to, I think, Gemini, and I tried a couple different tools, but I genuinely had to stop and think, like, to do what I'm trying to do, there's no way I'm doing it without AI. And that scared me, that thought of like, God, I'm becoming, and I can only imagine the people who are way more bullish and way more like, AI all the way for every single task. So I think that's a concern. It hasn't changed a lot of the way that we manage or that we lead. And I think in the age of AI that the human stuff becomes much more important than ever before. So even when we talked about marketing, just to take it back there for a second, is like what is working now and will always work? I think it's brand. I think it's like even in the sort of crazy lead up to 2021, everything was about automation and demand generation, and everything had to be tracked. And then we lost our cookies and search became less reliable. And what did it go back to? Basically the Mad Men era of like, can you put a piece of creative content out there in the world that people remember and that sticks out and they have a positive association with you? Like that stuff worked 50 years ago. It still works today. And I think on the management side, it's the same thing of like, how do you show up to meetings? How do you communicate? Like that stuff matters more than like, can I get Claude Cowork to triage my emails?
Yeah, I hear you. At the same time, people still have a lot of that rote task activity they need to do every day. As one of the great things I hear is that, the idea of AI is not to necessarily replace the human, because it's not going to do a great job of that. And humans are just so good. People are just so good at doing things like creativity and critical thinking, all that sort of stuff. But the idea is there's a lot of robotic tasks that people do. So it's taking the robot out of the person, the infamous TPS reports and all that, machines are better at summarizing things, note taking,
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
I think the EA role is extremely challenged right now because I think meeting notes and summaries is one. But even like I set up Claude Cowork today to help with my inbox because I lost my EA a couple months ago and we didn't replace. And my God, it's pretty good at like taking a bunch of junk and moving it to trash and finding the stuff that's relevant and drafting a semi-appropriate reply that needs minimal editing. Like I do think that there are some of those roles, those administrative roles that AI does a pretty good job of replacing. And again, it just goes back to like people have to level up and go deeper on the human skills.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, let's see. I only have a couple more questions for you because this has been fantastically insightful for our audience. I think it's an interesting perspective. A lot of the companies we've been talking to have themselves been tiny or have been larger companies, but they're helping tiny companies. And you started as a small organization, grew, and then reduced, and now are really focused on optimizing, which I think is really important. So perhaps like looking ahead, where do you see Proposify, as much as you can, heading in the next couple of years? You're already doing in the high, is it how many figures? 7 figures or so, 8 figures? I don't have to count properly in revenue. And
Seven.
yeah, and your team size is very manageable. So like, where do you see things heading in sort of the future? And how do you think that's relevant to the audience of folks who are trying to stay small, but highly efficient?
Well, there's a lot of people talking about bootstrapped. I think Adam Robinson, I don't know if you've had him on yet, but he's big on the $10 million ARR mark and doing it bootstrapped with like 3 people. And I think that's great if you can get there. But honestly, building a business is very much like riding a bike uphill. And if you let go, if you stop pedaling, you start to fall down. And I know that because we've been there. Like we didn't pedal for a number of years because we couldn't get out of our own way, and it hurt our growth. We started to decline in MRR. We had to turn things around. So I don't think anyone's safe. Even if you're a small bootstrap company and your margins are massive and you're living a great life, like at any time somebody can come and just do what you do better. And I mean, you mentioned having Beehive. Was it the email marketing tool?
Yeah. Tyler Denk, founder of Beehive, CEO of Beehive. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the sentiment online, I don't know what anyone's numbers are, but like the sentiment online is that they're like eating Kit's lunch. And Kit used to be ConvertKit, was like the darling for many years of like bootstrappers and
Right.
solopreneurs and that kind of thing.
And
My
the funny
point
thing is,
being,
and Kit was eating MailChimp's lunch.
yes,
Right.
exactly.
Oh,
Exactly. So, I mean, competition is fierce. And I don't think whether you're bootstrapped or you've raised, like nobody can rest on their laurels. You're not going to run the same business, the same 10 million ARR business for the next 20 years and retired. Like maybe in the past, our parents and grandparents did with small local businesses. It's a totally different game we're in where we're global. So, I mean, all that to say, like, where's Proposify going? I see us actually continuing to move up market and serve larger businesses, expand what we do into adjacent territories. So think like RFP solutions, CPQ or configure price quote. Like we know that those are areas that we kind of touch today, but we're a very like narrow point solution, and we need to broaden and become a bigger platform. I think AI is an enabler to achieve those outcomes that customers want, generate proposals, but get the oversight, get the visibility, get the analytics. AI has to be an enabler of that. So I see us continuing to move in that direction. And obviously we've raised money, so at some point we'll have to look to get acquired or whatever somebody who comes along wants to do, make us part of a bigger platform. We're always open to that, but I think that's what we're aiming for.
yeah. Well, that's just like, when you raise a round, you actually acquired a new boss and you have to please the needs of the investors. I mean, and that changed the dynamics of the entrepreneurship story all along. But I love what you were said about running a business is like riding a bicycle uphill. That's like a fantastic visual metaphor. And I think it's really insightful for everybody because you're right. If you sort of let your foot off the gas, I'm mixing metaphors at this point. If you stop pedaling, yeah, gravity will just take over, and it's an inevitability. I mean, you can't fight the laws of nature at that point, and I really do appreciate it. And I think it's interesting because it applies to the bigger companies too. A lot of them are taking, strangely enough, their foot off the pedal as they fight all sorts of other market dynamics and things will happen. You just look at what's happening with Tesla in the automotive industry. So
OpenAI.
exactly.
A year ago, it was like the king of the AI world, and Anthropic. Only nerds use that, and it's like Anthropic's made this massive comeback just recently.
Right. But a warning to Anthropic because the same can and will happen to them. They've been having all sorts of interesting issues lately. And as you know, people have been talking about the fact that Claude may not actually be counting tokens properly. People are burning through tokens a lot. Olama's not come out. Gemma's come out with alternatives. So yeah, keep pedaling. Keep pedaling. That's great advice. So we always have the last three questions are our rapid fire questions. We ask the same questions to everybody. We love the feedback we get because it
Oh
gives
God, I
people.
hate these. I hate these.
These are fantastic because everybody has like a different perspective. You think you'd get the same answers, but I don't think we've gotten the same answers twice. We've only had about 30 or so episodes so far, but still, I haven't gotten the same answers twice. So let's start with tools because people want to know about tools, stuff they can buy and use or make themselves, whatever it is. So what is one tool or automation, doesn't have to be AI, just one tool or automation that you absolutely can't run your business without, the one that gives you and your team the 10x leverage every single week?
The reason I hate these questions is because I always have trouble picking an answer because there's always so many options.
You can pick a few if there's like more than one, that's fine.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I mean, I hate to say it, but like Claude in general is a very useful for more things, and I feel like I'm only scratching the surface with what we can do with co-work and with Claude Code and that sort of thing. But I mean, the other ones are kind of like boring options, but like we use HubSpot a lot. We use like Jira, and Jira has this product called Product Discovery Board, where I'm very involved in the product side in my business, which is very useful. So I think a lot of these kind of old school incumbent companies, even though, yes, they're ripe for disruption, a lot of them I think got so big because they actually work pretty darn well.
Well, and even HubSpot themselves, I mean, they're rapidly innovating their own platform. So to say HubSpot today is not the same as the HubSpot 10 years ago, that's for sure.
True.
I know that they actually recently released a number of agentic tools and a bunch of others. So have you taken a look at any of those? Are they opportunities?
We
Yeah, yeah.
we've used Breeze, which is not agentic, but it's kind of their AI, answer bot and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I think they're doing a pretty good job of staying ahead of it. From what I can see, much better than Salesforce is doing with kind of innovating within their own platform. But that said, I mean, I do think a lot of these AI tools are in search of a problem, and a lot of times you just like Slack's been trying to push AI stuff to us for the last year, and we're like, I don't want to summarize all my Slack channels. Like, I actually just want to read what's there. So yeah, there's a lot of noise now to filter out.
Absolutely. So the next question is really more about processes, methods. So what is one system or process that you think every lean, leverage first team, small team trying to punch above their weight, what do you think they should have in place by the time they hit their first $1 million in revenue? What we say, the thing that separates the scalers, the ones who are really able to get that compound growth, that flywheel, from the grinders. They ground their way to get them first million. They're going to grind twice as hard to get the second million. So maybe what's one thing you would tell them to stop doing, or maybe something that they should start doing today?
Well, I think, that one is pretty easy because having a management system is one of the most effective ways to start to scale your people, your processes. Usually when teams start, they might have like a weekly meeting or an all hands or something like that with a few team members. But I think once you're at that $1 million mark, it's time to start looking into some kind of a system. I mean, we use a loose version of it names escaped me. Gina Wickman Traction EOS Entrepreneurial Operating System, which gives you kind of like a good cadence for quarterly offsite planning, weekly syncs, scorecard, big rocks or big objectives for the quarter. I mean, I have this long debate with my friend Matt Sims, who I started a podcast with because he feels it doesn't give you enough to work with. And he's a big proponent of like, Lean Six Sigma and those kind of things. But I think it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You could use OKRs if you prefer, although those are very tricky to get right. But having some kind of a management framework in place is going to help you be able to plug people into your team and have them create focus around the right things versus being reactive and just doing whatever fire there is to put out that particular week.
Yeah, that is actually a really big topic. That's a recurring topic that we have here on this podcast, because this is especially the issue even when you're tiny, even when you're one person. This is a thing that even Ben Broco is talking about at Pulse. He's like, when you're one person, you're pulled a million directions. So interestingly enough, you might think, well, you might need it when you have a large team. It's like, you might need it sooner than you think, especially if you have a bunch of bots doing stuff and you can literally do anything at any moment. That structure will help you manage the one resource you can't get more of, which is time. So that's fantastic advice. But yeah, it's a recurring topic we have. And actually, I don't even think we talked that much about EOS. So I'm glad you brought that up. We've talked about other methods, but not EOS. That's fantastic. So the last rapid fire has to do with a tip or advice. So what's one piece of advice you might give to a founder who's just now starting out and running a small team, maybe just themselves or a dinner table sized team, who wants to scale, who wants to do something that is not just selling their time or selling services? You've been there, done that, right? So like what experience, given now that you've had all this experience, what piece of advice would you share with them?
The thing that comes to mind, and it's not fun to say, it's not fun to hear for a lot of people, and they probably will ignore it until it becomes painful for them. Like this is advice they won't take. And it's basically, you're going to have to replace everybody on your team. That buddy that you started the company with, who you're, brothers, sisters in arms, loyal to each other, like that loyalty will probably kill you, because at a certain point, that person is 99.999% likely not to be able to scale to where you need them to, and not to be able to take you where the company needs to go. And if you don't have the hard conversation to say, you're great on the team, but not in that role, you can't lead that department, I need somebody else, they can hold you back. They can set you back a decade. And I'm not exaggerating, but most people won't have that conversation until it's already too late.
That's a hard one, especially if there are people that you know very well. We had an interesting interview with Rand Fishkin, who was the founder of Moz, and he started a couple of new companies called SparkToro, and he has strangely the opposite advice. He's like, start businesses with your friends. That's contrary advice. I'm like, well, it's contrary advice probably for a good reason, because of the position you talked about, which is like, well, what if your friends end up not being right for the business? It's hard to fire a friend. It's actually even harder to fire a family member. So, but people have done
Start with your friends, but at a certain point, they might have to move into a different role or say goodbye.
Yeah. So it's interesting episode, insight for this episode. That's for sure. Well, this has been fantastic. Kyle, you've provided so much insight, so much fantastic information. I want to thank you for sharing with our audience, and, let's keep this information going and flowing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on this, Ron.
Yeah, thank you. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about Proposify, maybe you're interested in the solution. I hope you are, because now you'll know more about the solution. You can go to the website Proposify, that's Proposify.com. You can connect with Kyle on LinkedIn, on X, and a bunch of places like that. And of course, we'll link to all of this in our show notes. So listen to this podcast, watch the podcast on YouTube, or listen to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast, and check the show notes that go with it, because we do have the link. So as mentioned, we always have a mantra at the end of all of our podcasts. So for this one, don't chase the funding, chase the customer growth, and focus on scaling and not focus on just growing your team. You've heard about what happens here. You might grow that team and even your early founders, and that team is likely to change. So focus on what really matters, and that's, of course, your customers. So if you love this interview with Kyle Racki, I want you to hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share it with that founder friend who's still thinking that success comes from multiple funding rounds and not reliably and consistently delivering value to your customers. So I want you to think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Micro teams aren't the future, they're the now. If this episode got you fired up, hit that subscribe button, share it with your crew, and join the movement over at scalability.com. That's scalebrate.com. Till next time, think big, stay lean, and scale smarter. Because you're not a tiny team, you're a micro team with mega potential. So get exponential, and thanks for tuning in to the Exponential Scale Podcast.